Welcome, dear dreamer. And tonight, we drift into an ancient world where time did not move in straight lines, but in circles shaped by fire, harvest, and the quiet shifting of the seasons. In the Celtic lands, the year itself was a living spirit, breathing through frost and bloom, whispering through fields and forests, rising each time flame touched the dark. These were nights when the world felt tender and vast, when people gathered beneath open skies to honor the turning of the wheel of the year. The old festivals, Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain, were more than celebrations. They were thresholds between light and shadow, between life and rest. Each one carried its own mood, its own fire, its own quiet wonder. And as the seasons turned, so did the hearts of the people, finding meaning in the balance of warmth and cold, growth and stillness, beginnings and endings that always returned. Before we begin, tell me directly, what are the simple things you do at night that help you fall asleep faster? Share them with me. I would truly love to read everyone. And if these soft journeys through myth and memory bring you peace, feel free to subscribe so we can continue wandering these ancient paths together. Long before written calendars traced their careful grids across parchment, and long before bells or clocks divided the day into measured parts, the ancient Celts lived by a quieter rhythm. Time rose and fell like breath, guided by the fields, the winds, the length of shadows, and the firelit ceremonies that marked each passing threshold. To them, the world was not a sequence of dates, but a living cycle unfolding through the seasons, each one carrying a spirit, a mood, a whisper of the invisible. Their year did not begin with winter or spring. It began with darkness, with stillness, with the hum of the earth preparing to turn again. The Celtic calendar grew from the land itself. Long nights taught them patience. The returning light taught them gratitude, and the open sky, changing hue by hue, taught them to understand the subtle movements of the sun. They watched the length of shadows stretch and withdraw, noted the way frost clung to heather in early morning, and listened to rivers deepen or thin depending on the season's breath. From these natural cues, they shaped a circle of time, one that did not simply track the seasons, but honored them. Unlike many ancient cultures that marked the solstices and equinoxes as their primary turning points, the Celts lived by a calendar woven around the midpoints between them. These were the hinge days, the thresholds, where the world seemed to lean from one state into another. They felt that the true shift of the year was not found in the longest or shortest days, but in the quiet transitions. The growing light after winter, the full bloom of summer, the early whisper of harvest, and the darkening that signaled the year's descent. Each of these transitions called for fire, a symbolic dawn, a reminder that life moved in cycles, not lines. In the oldest communities, the turning of the year was understood through experience rather than calculation. Children learned to sense the seasons by watching when lambs were born, when the first buds appeared on hawthorn branches, when the soil grew soft beneath the plough, or when the cold crept deeper through stone walls. Elders could predict seasonal change simply by observing the tilt of birds in the sky or the scent carried by evening wind. These observations formed the heart of their calendar, a living dialogue between people and the land they depended upon. As centuries passed, this intuitive understanding evolved into a spiritual structure. The year became a wheel, continuous, circular, and sacred. Each festival marked not only a seasonal shift, but a shift in the energy of the world. Imbolc brought purification and early light. Beltane brought fire, growth, and passion. Lughnasadh carried the warmth of harvest's beginning. Samhain brought darkness, remembrance, and the thinning of the veil. Together, these festivals became spokes on the wheel, evenly spaced, guiding the year through its endless turning. But before the festivals themselves took shape, there was simply observation. The Celts, living close to the land, noticed how winter's grip slowly released its hold long before spring visibly returned. They recognized how summer reached its fullest bloom just before the solstice's peak. They felt the harvest season arrive in the air before the fields themselves ripened. And they understood that darkness carried its own kind of beginning, Samhain marking the start of the year not with celebration, but with quiet reflection, as though honoring the seed lying unseen beneath the soil. Historians often describe the Celtic calendar as lunisolar, a blending of cycles that followed both moon and sun. Yet this does not fully capture its nature. It was less a system and more a relationship. The moon guided nightly rhythms, shaping tides and rituals. The sun guided the wider arc of the seasons. Together, they shaped an understanding of time that felt fluid, responsive, and deeply rooted in lived experience. To the Celts, the heavens were not distant. They were teachers, always present, always speaking through their steady patterns. In the countryside, the arrival of each season brought its own subtle heralds. When winter's depth began to soften, people noticed water flowing freely again in frozen streams, or the faint bleat of newborn lambs echoing through early morning mist. When the first true warmth reached the earth, the hawthorn blossomed in delicate white clusters, signaling the early stirrings of Beltane. When the first grains became heavy in the field, the air filled with a scent both sweet and earthy, heralding Lughnasadh. And when the final leaves loosened from branches under autumn wind, the world leaned toward Samhain, inviting quiet and remembrance. Even the stones remembered the seasons. Ancient standing circles, some so old their builders remain unnamed, were aligned with the turning of the year. Sunlight would spill through a doorway only on a certain morning. Shadow would touch a carved mark only on a certain dusk. These megaliths acted as anchors for the calendar, bridging human understanding with celestial rhythm. Villagers who gathered around these stones did not see them as monuments. They saw them as companions, silent ones, older and wiser than any living storyteller. Life in these early Celtic communities moved at the pace dictated by this wheel. In winter, families huddled close, sharing stories by firelight, conserving resources and reflecting on the year's passage. In spring, the world opened, and labor began anew, fields plowed, livestock blessed, homes cleaned and purified. In summer, life blossomed into fullness, fields green, rivers bright, days long and warm. In autumn, gratitude filled the air, harvests gathered, and preparations made for the cold to return. The wheel turned, always forward, yet always returning to itself. The Celts viewed time as a cycle not only in nature, but in the human spirit. Birth, growth, maturity, decline, rest, these mirrored the seasons, weaving each life into the larger tapestry of the world. To them, living in harmony with the natural year brought balance and meaning. The festivals were not distractions, they were reminders. Each fire lit represented both an ending and a beginning, a moment of transition where the visible world and the unseen one came close enough to touch. And so, over generations, the Celtic calendar became a sacred anchor, one that helped people navigate not only the turning of the seasons, but the turning of their own lives. The wheel was steady, constant, and deeply reassuring. Even in times of hardship, failed harvests, storms, illness, the seasons continued their pattern. Light returned after dark, warmth returned after cold, growth returned after stillness, and year after year the wheel reminded them that no state, no emotion, no hardship endured forever. By the time the great seasonal festivals were fully formed, the Celts were living within a beautifully woven spiritual structure. Their year was not fragmented, but whole, a continuous movement through light and shadow, birth and rest, celebration and reflection. The wheel guided them through time the way stars guide travelers through night. And though much of their world has changed, the sense of this wheel remains, turning quietly across centuries, its ancient fire still glowing in memory. For the year, to the Celts, was never a line to be followed. It was a circle to be lived, a rhythm felt beneath the skin. a conversation between earth and sky that continues even now in the quiet turning of seasons and the soft flicker of firelight. As generations passed and the Celtic world deepened its understanding of the seasons, the calendar became more than a guide for survival. It became a spiritual framework through which people understood their place in the universe. Time was not abstract or mechanical. It lived in the soil beneath them, in the winds that crossed their valleys, and in the fires they lit to mark the turning of each sacred threshold. The year was a teacher, steady and patient, offering lessons through the rise and fall of light. The rhythms of the agricultural cycle lay at the center of this understanding. When winter loosened its grip and the earth softened under the first touch of warmth, the people felt the calendar stirring awake. The lengthening of daylight was not merely a scientific shift, it was a spiritual one. It carried the promise of renewal. The sheep began to lamb, the wells thawed, and the first green shoots pierced through the cold ground. The natural world itself announced Imbolc long before any ritual flame was lit. For the Celts, the land never lied. It revealed the calendar through its own breath. The communities who lived by this wheel were not isolated from the unpredictability of nature. Winters sometimes arrived early or lingered longer than expected. Storms could destroy crops, droughts could thin rivers, and harsh cold could claim livestock. Yet even in the face of adversity, the people held to the wheel as a source of stability. They trusted that the rhythm would continue, that light would return, that harvest would follow growth, and that the cycle would turn even when their own lives felt uncertain. This trust in the wheel created a culture profoundly rooted in resilience. Among the most fascinating aspects of Celtic timekeeping was the belief that each festival marked not simply a seasonal shift, but a moment when the boundary between worlds thinned. These thresholds were subtle, a quickening of life that was just beginning, or a quiet dimming that signaled the approach of rest. During these liminal times, the Celts believed the spiritual realm came closer to the human one. Fire was lit not only for celebration, but for protection, illumination, and connection. It stood as a symbol of the human spirit, reaching upward to meet the shifting tides of the year. This connection to the unseen shaped the way the Celts approached each part of the year. They understood light and darkness not as opposites, but as necessary reflections of one another. Light revealed, warmed, and inspired. Darkness preserved, gestated, and transformed. The wheel turned between these two states with a deliberate rhythm, like the inhale and exhale of the world. Even the longest nights held the seed of returning dawn, just as the brightest days contained the first whisper of their decline. This understanding gave the calendar its unique character. It was not a measure of passing time, but a celebration of cyclical truth. Throughout Celtic regions, families developed intimate customs tied to seasonal observation. A mother might teach her child to recognize the exact moment hawthorn blossoms appeared on the hedgerow, the unofficial announcement that spring's heart had opened. Shepherds knew the exact shade of morning light that signaled when to move flocks to higher ground. Farmers listened for the tone of the wind across their fields to know whether rains would nourish or threaten their crops. With each small sign, the calendar came alive in their daily lives. The sky itself was a constant companion in this practice. At night, when torches dimmed and the world grew quiet, people gazed upward to study the moon's changing shape. The moon guided countless decisions: when to plant, when to harvest certain herbs, when to begin rituals of blessing or protection. Its cycles wove through the year like an inner thread, binding celestial rhythms to human experience. In this way, the calendar was not merely solar or lunar. It was both, intertwined in a seamless dance that shaped the identity of the community. Sacred enclosures, early wooden henges, stone circles, and earthen mounds played a central role in anchoring time. These sites were more than places of gathering. They were spiritual instruments, carefully aligned so the sun would strike particular points at significant moments of the year. At sunrise on certain mornings, a beam of light would enter a stone passageway or illuminate a chamber that lay dark the rest of the year. These brief moments were understood as messages from the cosmos, affirming the connection between earth, sky, and human life. The people who stood in these sacred sites were witnesses to the turning of the world itself. Some stones carried carvings, spirals, circles within circles, flowing lines that seemed to map energy rather than geography. These symbols are still debated by scholars, yet many believe they represent the cycles at the heart of the Celtic worldview. The spiral of time, the continuous movement of season into season, the eternal return encoded in the landscape. To those who carved them, these symbols were not art alone. They were forms of memory, markers of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. As the Celtic territories expanded and interacted with neighboring cultures, their calendar absorbed influences, yet maintained its core identity. Roman chroniclers marveled at how deeply these people relied on seasonal observation. Even as foreign ideas arrived, new gods, new tools, new methods, the wheel persisted. It survived not because it was enforced, but because it was lived. It belonged not to institutions but to the land, and therefore to everyone who depended on that land. Farmers, warriors, poets, healers, each looked to the wheel in their own way. Poets, especially, played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting this understanding of time. Known as Philid, they composed verses that tied the seasons to human emotion and memory. Their poems described the cracked stillness of winter hearths, the sweetness of early milk in spring, the intoxicating fullness of summer meadows, and the solemn hush of autumn fields after harvest. These verses became oral calendars, lyrical reminders of how the wheel moved and how people should move with it. Even long after writing became common, the oral tradition endured, passed from voice to voice like a living flame. The ceremonial year took shape gradually, shaped by these observations and woven with mythic meaning. But at its heart remained something simple, a recognition that life unfolded in patterns. Birth followed rest, growth followed stillness, gratitude followed abundance, closure followed fullness. This pattern repeated in the land and in the human soul, linking the cycle of seasons to the cycle of life itself. To live by the wheel was to live with awareness, of change, of balance, of the quiet transformations happening both within and around. Even in moments of celebration, the Celts held a profound awareness of transience. Summer fires burned bright, but they always dimmed. Harvest fields overflowed, but they were always emptied. Winter nights were long, but they always gave way to dawn. This acceptance did not diminish their joy, it deepened it. Every season was cherished precisely because it would not last. Every fire was honored because it would one day fade. Every light was sacred because it rose out of darkness and would one day return to it. By the time the wheel fully formed into the structure we now recognize, it had become more than a calendar. It was a worldview. It guided spiritual practice, agricultural labor, social gatherings, artistic expression, and the rhythm of daily life. And though centuries have passed, its influence lingers. The fires of Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain still burn in modern celebrations, echoing the ancient knowledge that shaped them. For the Celts understood something timeless, that the year is not a march forward but a circular story, one that repeats, one that teaches, one that brings both darkness and light in gentle, inevitable turnings. And in honoring this sacred wheel, they learned to honor themselves, their land, and the quiet, eternal pulse of the world they walked upon. Long before the warmth of spring could be felt beneath the fingers, long before fields stirred or rivers fully awakened from their winter stillness, the ancient Celts sensed a quiet change moving through the world. It was small at first, no more than a soft loosening in the air, a subtle lengthening of daylight, a sense that the deep slumber of winter had reached its turning point. Imbolc arrived not with spectacle but with breath, a whisper rather than a shout. It was the moment when the year exhaled, and the promise of renewal flickered gently at the edges of the cold. For communities bound to the land, this transition was one of profound relief and hope. Winter, with its long nights and meager resources, demanded patience and endurance. By the time the season reached its midpoint, stores of food ran thin, hearth fires burned longer, and families gathered close beneath furs and wool. Yet even in this season of scarcity, the people waited for signs, fragile but certain, that life would soon begin again. The first of these signs was the birth of lambs. Their voices, high and trembling in the early morning frost, carried across fields like small, bright declarations that spring lay near. Imbolc was the celebration of this early stirring. It marked the gentle return of light after the deepest darkness of the year. Though snow often still blanketed the hills and ice clung stubbornly to stream edges, the Celts recognized that beneath the frozen surface, the earth was shifting. Seeds tucked deep underground were waking. Animals that had grown quiet with winter began to move. The days, once swiftly devoured by night, held just a few heartbeats more light, and the people responded with rituals woven from gratitude, purification, and the soft flutter of anticipation. At the center of Imbolc stood Brigid, a goddess of fire, healing, poetry, and early spring. She was a figure of tenderness and strength, a bearer of blessings who moved between the worlds of hearth and field with ease. To the Celts, Brigid embodied the returning light itself, gentle yet persistent, warm yet restrained. Her presence was felt in the first drops of thawed water, in the soft glow of firelight on a winter afternoon, in the renewed spark of creativity that settled into the hearts of poets and healers. Imbolc was her festival, her moment to walk the land, blessing homes, animals, and the slow rebirth of the world. In preparation for her arrival, families cleaned their homes with meticulous care. This was more than the removal of winter's dust. It was a spiritual cleansing, a clearing of old energy to welcome the new season. Hearths were swept, tools repaired, linens washed, and altars arranged with offerings of milk, butter, and bread. Doors were unlatched just before nightfall, left slightly open so that Brigid's spirit could enter freely. For the Celts believed she walked through every village on Imbolc's eve, moving silently from home to home, bringing protection and renewal to all who honored her. As night deepened, fires were extinguished, then ceremonially rekindled. This ritual held ancient meaning. The extinguishing acknowledged winter's long darkness. The relighting signified the first fragile glow of the year's returning warmth. Some communities lit a single flame from which all other hearths were kindled, symbolizing unity and the shared breath of the season. Others created small fires outside their homes, watching sparks drift upward as if carrying prayers to the unseen. And in the quiet between firelit moments, people felt the presence of Brigid moving near. Brigid's crosses, woven from rushes or straw, were crafted during these nights with deliberate care. Their shape, a four-armed spiral radiating from a central knot, represented protection, continuity, and the gentle spinning of the year itself. Families hung them above doorways in stables near wells and over sleeping children. Each cross carried a blessing for the seasons ahead, believed to guard against illness, misfortune, and the lingering chill of winter. The weaving itself became an act of devotion, a meditative gesture that mirrored the slow awakening of life. In the countryside, women prepared Brigid's bed, a small woven cradle placed near the hearth. Into it, they laid a wand or decorated staff, symbolizing her creative and healing power. Some crafted small dolls, bridogs, representing the goddess in her youthful aspect. These figures were carried from house to house by groups of girls singing softly through the night, their voices weaving through the darkness like threads of early light. At each home, they received offerings in exchange for blessings, continuing a tradition that echoed across generations. Purification rites played a central role in Imbolc, for the festival marked not only the return of light, but the cleansing of all that winter had held. Wells and springs, sources of life for the Celts, were visited at dawn long before the first warmth could settle on the water's surface. People walked barefoot through frost to reach them, cupping their hands to lift cold, clear water to their faces. They washed their eyes, their foreheads, their palms, believing the water carried Brigid's blessing. These wells were often decorated with flowers, ribbons, and cloth strips known as cluties, each representing a prayer or wish tied to the healing power of the spring. As the morning grew brighter, households prepared simple feasts made from what remained of winter stores. Dairy played an important role. Fresh milk, butter, and soft cheeses symbolized fertility and the renewing strength of the land. Oatcakes, honey, and early greens were shared in quiet gratitude. The feasts were not grand, for winter still lingered, but they were warm, intimate, and filled with hope. Every bite tasted of anticipation, of fields that would soon awaken and of the life that stirred beneath the frost. Outside, the land held its own subtle signs. Snowdrops, delicate white flowers that pierced the cold earth, were seen as Brigid's own blossoms, heralds of her presence. Their fragile petals trembled in winter wind, yet remained unbroken, embodying the resilience of early light. Shepherds watched for lambs born with the season, gathering them close to shelters warmed by straw and love. Fires crackled gently in nearby fields, not as great bonfires, but as small, steady flames meant to guide the season's return. As the day unfolded, poets and artisans sought inspiration in the festival's gentle energy. Imbolc was seen as a time when creativity awakened within the mind the way seeds awakened beneath soil. Bards recited verses about returning light, about the whispered promise of spring, about Brigid's healing touch upon frost-covered fields. Smiths, the keepers of sacred fire, offered quiet prayers before their forges, feeling the connection between the goddess's flame and their own work. In every craft, every word, every small gesture, Imbolc breathed a soft spark into human hands. Even as evening returned, Imbolc's spirit lingered. Families gathered once more by the hearth, speaking in low voices about the months to come. Some recounted dreams they believed were messages from Brigid. Others shared stories about ancestors who had walked through harsher winters and found renewal each time the wheel turned. Children played with rushes left over from the day's weaving, their laughter ringing like small bells in the gentle dark. And outside, beneath the vast winter sky, the first stars appeared, sharp, bright, and unwavering. For Imbolc was a reminder that even in the coldest, most silent moments of the year, life persisted. Light returned slowly but faithfully. Warmth gathered strength beneath the soil, and hope, soft, resilient, unwavering, rose in the hearts of people who had learned to read the world with patience. In the glow of Imbolc's early light, the year felt young again, the world felt tender, and the promise of spring trembled just beyond the frost. As Imbolc unfolded across the land, its gentle light seeped into every corner of daily life, touching both the quiet routines of households and the sacred practices of those who tended the spiritual needs of their communities. Though winter still held the fields in a pale grip, Imbolc brought a shift that was felt more in the spirit than in the soil. It was a time when people looked not at what already bloomed, but at what would bloom, a season built on promise, on the subtle tremor of life pushing softly against the dark. The festival's rituals stretched beyond the home. In the early hours of the morning, when the frost lay thick on the grass and smoke from hearths drifted lazily into the pale sky, groups of villagers walked together towards sacred sites. These could be old stone circles, natural springs, hilltops, or lone standing stones weathered by centuries of wind. The journey itself was part of the ritual, each footstep symbolizing a movement toward renewal, each breath a reminder of the cold season slowly receding. As they walked, the world around them stirred with the faintest hints of transition. Birds, silent through the deepest winter, let out tentative calls. Twigs cracked gently underfoot. Frost sparkled on low brambles, catching the dim morning light and scattering it into glimmers that looked like fragments of Brigid's fire. The people did not rush. Imbolc was not a festival of loud cheer or wild revelry. It was a soft awakening, one that asked for quiet hearts and open senses. At sacred wells, pilgrims approached with reverence. These wells were often ancient, some older than memory itself, their waters flowing with an unbroken thread of clarity. People dipped linen strips into the water, tying them to branches of nearby trees. Clooty trees, living songlines decorated with prayers for healing and protection. Each strip of cloth whispered with the hopes of those who had walked the same path for generations. The wish for health, a blessing for a newborn child, comfort for the grieving, strength for the weary. In these moments, Imbolc's quiet magic seemed strongest. Mist hovered above the earth, drifting slowly through the trees as though carrying the breath of the goddess herself. People knelt to drink the cold water, believing it washed away illness and weariness, preparing them for the light that was returning. As droplets touched their tongues, they felt a sense of renewal more internal than physical, a small kindling in the center of the chest, warm despite the lingering cold. Back in the villages, hearth fires remained the heart of the celebration. Though the lighting of the Imbolc flame began at dusk the night before, its significance continued through the entire festival. Families tended the fire carefully, feeding it small pieces of peat or wood blessed with Brigid's name. They believed this flame protected the household, ensuring that illness and hardship would pass by their door in the months to come. Children were taught to treat the hearth with reverence, for it was seen as a living symbol of the season's returning strength. Women played a particularly central role in Imbolc traditions, reflecting Brigid's identity as a goddess of hearth, home, and healing. Mothers and daughters wove fresh Brigid's crosses to hang in barns, believing the goddess would protect the animals through the final stretch of winter. They crafted small dolls of straw or rushes, dressing them with ribbons or fragments of cloth, creating representations not of the goddess herself, but of the gentle light she carried. These figures were placed in cradles or on altars, offered milk, butter, and fresh water, as if welcoming a guest whose presence brought health and hope. The presence of livestock contributed strongly to the season's character, for the Celts understood Imbolc not merely as a human festival, but as a turning of life in all its forms. Calves and lambs, symbols of new beginnings, were born within this window, their cries of first breath breaking the stillness of frozen mornings. These new lives were honored as part of Brigid's blessing, woven into the tapestry of renewal that stretched across land and sky. Farmers watched their herds with careful eyes, noting how the animals responded to the changing light, how their movements mirrored the slow pulse of early spring. Even the act of tending sheep became a small ritual. The warmth of the barns, the smell of straw, the soft sound of animals stirring, these simple routines held sacred weight during Imbolc. Shepherds often carried small blessings on their person, tiny Brigid's crosses, bits of woven straw, or talismans carved with spirals, believing these objects helped guide the goddess's protection to their flocks. Under the glow of lantern light, they whispered quiet prayers for health and abundance, never loud enough to disturb the animals. And in the deep countryside, away from the bustle of villages, solitary practitioners honored Imbolc with rituals shaped by nature itself. They watched the sky for the faint glow of dawn, listening for the subtle change in birdsong that marked the season's shift. They gathered water from springs flowing beneath ice, feeling its cold purity as a reminder of winter's fading grip. Some lit small fires in sheltered clearings, their flames dancing in the stillness of early morning, illuminating the frost-covered world as though awakening it. Poets were especially moved during this time. Imbolc, with its association to Brigid, patron of poets and smiths, was sacred to those who shaped words and metals. Poets sat by the hearth with ink-stained fingers, capturing the sensation of early light filtering through cold windows. Their verses described the subtle awakening of the land, the trembling strength of snowdrops, the tenderness of lambs, the quiet grace of a goddess whose presence felt more like a whisper than a proclamation. These poems, carried orally through generations, preserved the emotional texture of the festival long after the rituals themselves changed. In the smithies, where the air was warm and filled with the scent of heated metal, blacksmiths offered their own devotions to Brigid. They considered fire not merely a tool, but a sacred force that transformed raw material into something purposeful. On Imbolc, they often forged small charms or tools blessed in the goddess's name, objects believed to carry protection and luck. The ringing of hammers against anvils echoed through the air like a hymn, each strike honoring both the goddess's flame and the coming season of renewal. Communal gatherings brought the village together as the day moved on. Though the depths of winter made travel difficult, people still ventured to neighbors' homes or central meeting spaces to share food, warmth, and stories. Elders spoke of Imbolc festivals from their own youth, passing down tales of Brigid and the early days of the world when gods walked openly through fields and forests. Children listened with bright eyes, imaginations stirred by the idea of a goddess visiting their homes on the coldest night of the year. Often, musicians played gentle tunes on pipes or strings while dancers performed slow, weaving patterns around the hearth. The dances were not boisterous or energetic, but fluid, symbolizing the turning of the seasons, the circle of the year, and the flow of energy from darkness to light. These movements were quiet prayers made physical, gestures of honor, gratitude, and expectation. Evening returned with a softness that felt different from winter's usual heaviness. The fires, though small, glowed with a warmth that felt symbolic of something greater rising within the land. Shadows danced along walls. The air inside homes smelled of smoke, honey, milk, and early herbs harvested from storage. People settled into quiet reflection, knowing that Imbolc was as much about inward renewal as outward celebration. Outside, the land exhaled. Frost shimmered beneath moonlight, yet the cold no longer felt absolute. Somewhere beneath the soil, roots stirred. Seeds swelled with the first signs of life. The world lay still, yet full of potential, like a breath held gently before it becomes a sigh. This was Imbolc's gift, a reminder that even the smallest flicker of light carries the promise of warmth, that life awakens quietly long before it is seen, and that the turning of the year always begins in silence. Long before the sun warmed the fields into full bloom, long before summer's bright chorus filled the air, there was a moment in the Celtic year when the world felt suspended between spring's tenderness and summer's rising force. This liminal time, neither soft nor fierce, neither budding nor fully grown, was honored as Beltane, the festival of early summer's fire. Unlike Imbolc's whisper or Samhain's hush, Beltane arrived with a kind of luminous joy, a bright stirring that moved through land and spirit alike. It was the season when warmth finally overcame the last fragile traces of cold, and life unfurled with bold, unabashed color. To the ancient Celts, Beltane marked the true arrival of summer. It was not defined by a date, but by a feeling, a shift sensed in the earth itself. The air grew rich with the scent of blossoms. Meadows filled with wildflowers swaying in mild breezes. Rivers ran fuller, reflecting sunlight in long silver ribbons. Cattle grew restless in their winter enclosures, eager to be driven out to pasture. Everywhere, the land seemed to hum with the promise of vitality. And in this hum, the people heard the call of Beltane. Beltane's origins were woven into the agricultural heart of Celtic life. It was the festival that welcomed the season of growth, when crops were planted, herds were moved, and the world became bright with new life. But its significance ran deeper than agriculture. Beltane was a festival of blessing, protection, fertility, and the sacred joy of being alive. The fires lit during this time were more than flames. They were symbols of cleansing, transition, and the spark that ignited the world's next great cycle of abundance. Preparations began days before the festival. As the last cool winds of spring passed through the valleys, families cleaned their homes and prepared offerings for the coming fire rites. Young people gathered early herbs, hawthorn blossoms, primrose, rowan leaves, and yellow flowers whose color mimicked the returning sun. These plants were seen as conduits of summer's energy, threads connecting human life with the renewing spirit of the land. Homes were decorated with garlands, doorsteps were swept, tools were repaired. Beltane asked for readiness, not only of body or hearth, but of heart. As dusk approached on the eve of Beltane, communities gathered in open fields or upon hilltops, where the first great fires would soon blaze. The sky at this hour held a lingering softness, blue fading into gold, gold into a gentle shade of rose. Children sat bundled in cloaks, watching with wide eyes as elders prepared the bonfire's structure. Stacks of wood, carefully chosen from local forests, were arranged in tall, triangular shapes, symbolizing the upward movement of life. When the moment came, a single flame was carried from the village hearth, its glow small but steady in the dimming night. This flame, representing the heart fire of the community, was touched to the base of the great pyre. What followed was not instant fire, but a slow ignition. The whisper of smoke, the crackle of dry twigs, the first timid rise of flame that grew, breath by breath, into a radiant blaze. As the bonfire climbed into the night, its light painted glowing shapes across the faces of those gathered. Shadows danced like spirits. Sparks drifted upward like fireflies returning to the stars, and the people felt themselves entering a threshold, stepping out of the quiet of the colder months and into the boldness of the season ahead. When the fire reached its full height, rituals of protection began. Cattle, essential to Celtic survival, were driven between twin bonfires, a practice known as the Eid-Muin. The heat and smoke were believed to cleanse the animals of illness and misfortune, blessing them for the months of grazing ahead. Shepherds, farmers, and families stood nearby, whispering prayers as the animals moved through the glowing corridor. It was not the flame that protected them, but the intention, the belief that the fire carried the blessing of summer's guardian spirits. People, too, passed through the smoke, raising their hands to let the drifting warmth touch their faces. They believed the fire purified, strengthened, and shielded them from unseen forces that wandered freely during the seasonal shift. The scent of burning herbs, throwing into the blaze sprigs of rowan, broom, or meadowsweet, filled the air with earthy sweetness. These herbs were chosen for their protective qualities, believed to repel harmful spirits and attract good fortune. As the smoke curled into the night sky, villagers saw in it the rising energy of summer itself. After these rites, the atmosphere softened into celebration. People danced around the bonfire in gentle spirals, feet brushing the dewy earth, bodies moving in patterns shaped less by choreography and more by intuition. Dancers wove ribbons in the air, lifted their arms to the firelight, and let the rhythm of the drum carry them into a sense of unity with the land. For Beltane was not a festival of formal structure, it was a festival of life expressing itself freely. And dancing, in all its spontaneity, was one of its oldest forms of prayer. At the edges of the firelight, musicians played pipes and small drums, their melodies weaving through the night like threads of light. Songs of love, longing, and the returning warmth filled the space between dancers and fire. For Beltane was also a festival of affection and union. It honored not only the fertility of the land, but the deep connections between people. Couples slipped quietly into the shadows of the forest, walking beneath hawthorn and birch trees whose branches carried blessings of growth and harmony. Many bonds were formed on Beltane night, some lasting a season, others a lifetime. In some regions, A ritual known as the May Bow took place, where a branch of blooming hawthorn or rowan was placed above doorways to invite good fortune into the home. These branches, adorned with ribbons or flowers, shimmered gently in the wind, each movement echoing the spirit of the season. The hawthorn, in particular, was sacred during Beltane, its blossoms considered both beautiful and powerful, a symbol of early summer's awakening. Yet they were gathered with respect, for the tree was believed to house guardian spirits. No one took more than what was needed, and offerings were left beneath the branches in gratitude. As the night deepened, the bonfire burned higher, its flames shifting from bright orange to gold and then to a pale, shimmering glow. Sparks drifted upward and vanished among the stars. The air grew warmer around the circle of fire, but cooler at its edges, creating a comforting contrast. People moved back and forth between the warmth and the chill, as though mirroring the transition from spring to summer. Children grew sleepy, their heads resting on the laps of elders who told them stories of ancient Beltane nights when gods and spirits walked the earth. These stories were woven with mythic strands, tales of lovers who leapt through fire to seal their bond, of spirits who guided crops to growth, of guardians who protected the herds through the summer months. Some spoke of the Green Man, a spirit of vegetation whose face could be found hidden in the patterns of leaves. Others spoke of the May Queen, a figure of radiance and abundance who symbolized the fertile power of the season. These figures, though varied across regions, shared a common theme. The world was alive with magic during Beltane, and indeed, the night felt enchanted. Even the quietest moments carried a sense of warmth. The soft crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices, the sigh of wind brushing through newly opened leaves. On hillsides overlooking the fields, the first fireflies appeared, glowing faintly in the dark as though answering the bonfire's call. The moon, rising low and luminous, cast silver light across meadows that shimmered with dew. The world felt awake, vibrant, and full of possibilities. Before dawn, once the fire had burned low and embers began to settle into deep red, people gathered one last time around the warmth. They cupped their hands over the glowing coals, absorbing the lingering heat as a final blessing. Some collected ashes to spread around their homes or fields, believing they carried protective energy. Others carried home a piece of the flame itself, lighting their hearths with a fire touched by Beltane's radiance. And as morning broke, washing the world in pale gold, the energy of the festival softened into a quiet, steady warmth. Birds burst into song, fields glimmered with early light, and the land felt fully awake. Beltane had blessed it, awakened it, and welcomed the season of growth, for Beltane was more than a fire. It was a threshold, a moment when the world stepped from the tenderness of spring into the bold, bright heart of summer. As dawn slowly crept across the Beltane fields, the great bonfires that had blazed through the night settled into warm, glowing beds of ember. Their heat seeped gently into the cool morning air, creating soft plumes of steam that drifted upward like lingering prayers. The world at this hour felt unusually hushed, as if the land itself were catching its breath after a night of radiant celebration. Yet beneath this quiet surface, summer's pulse thrummed steadily, awakening the world with new vigor. Those who had danced through the night sat now in small clusters, wrapped in cloaks against the morning chill. Their faces were still illuminated by the soft glow of what remained of the fire, their eyes heavy yet bright with the memory of warmth and dancing flames. Beltane was never a single moment or ritual. It was a slow unfolding, a day that carried within it the afterglow of night and the rising promise of the season ahead. As the sun climbed gently above the hills, its rays mingled with curling smoke, creating an ethereal haze that felt like a blessing in motion. The bonfire's ashes held deep symbolic meaning, and people approached them with quiet reverence. Ash was believed to carry the protective power of the fire, and so families gathered small amounts in clay pots or wrapped them in cloth, These ashes would be sprinkled in fields to bless crops, scattered near doorways to protect homes, or mixed with water for healing rites. Each handful represented a portion of summer's strength, captured during the night and carried into the months of growth. Even as the flames faded, the fire's spirit remained, woven into the land and into the hands that carried it. As the morning brightened, herders prepared their cattle for the journey toward open pastures. The herds had been blessed in the night's fire rite, and now they were guided out of winter enclosures into fields lush with dew-covered grass. The movement of cattle across meadows, their slow procession under the rising sun, felt like one of Beltane's oldest songs, steady, rhythmic, full of unspoken gratitude. Herd animals were vital to Celtic life, and their well-being mirrored the well-being of the community. Seeing them walk through green fields felt like watching prosperity itself take shape. In the heart of villages, Beltane continued through gentle rituals of protection. Rowan branches, believed to guard against harmful spirits, were placed above doorways and tied to stable doors. Small woven tokens, circles of branches decorated with ribbons or wildflowers, hung from beams inside homes. The scent of early blossoms drifted through thresholds, mingling with the lingering smell of smoke on clothing and skin. These simple, tactile symbols created an atmosphere of comfort, as though every doorway had been softened by the season's touch. Children, too, played their part in the morning rites. They ran barefoot through the damp grass, gathering wildflowers, bluebells, buttercups, violets, and early foxglove, to create garlands for family members. Their laughter wove through the air like threads of brightness, echoing the vitality Beltane encouraged. They placed crowns of flowers on the heads of elders, offering blessings in the form of petals and color. Though young, they understood instinctively that Beltane was a celebration of life's growth, and they moved through the morning with an energy that mirrored the season itself. Hawthorn trees, which blossomed most fully during Beltane, held a special place in the day's rituals. People approached these trees with reverence, for they were believed to stand between this world and the other world. Hawthorn blossoms, delicate and fragrant, were gathered with careful hands and offered at household altars or woven into garlands worn by those seeking summer's blessing. Yet no one cut branches recklessly. The hawthorn was a tree of enchantment, watched over by unseen guardians. Only what was freely offered by the tree, fallen blossoms, easily reached stems, was taken. In many regions, the maypole stood as Beltane's living symbol. A tall wooden pole, often from birch or ash, was set into the earth and decorated with long ribbons in colors of summer: red for life, white for purity, green for growth, blue for blessing. As the morning warmed, villagers gathered around it, taking up the ribbons and weaving intricate patterns through movement alone. The dance around the maypole was slow, rhythmic, and filled with joy. Each step created a spiral of color, echoing the great spiral of the year as it turned toward its brightest half. Musicians played lively tunes during the maypole dance: pipes, harps, and small drums whose sounds mingled with birdsong and rustling leaves. The rhythms grew and softened like a heartbeat. Those watching from the edges swayed with the music, some humming along, others simply closing their eyes and letting the sound settle deep within them. The dance was more than celebration. It was communion with the season, a physical expression of harmony between people and nature. As midday approached, feasts began. Unlike winter festivals with their hearty stews and preserved foods, Beltane's meals were fresh, colorful, and filled with early abundance. Bowls of new greens, cheeses, honey, spring berries, and oatcakes graced long wooden tables. Milk flowed freely, symbolizing growth and nourishment. Families shared these meals outdoors whenever weather allowed, spreading cloths under blooming trees or beside gentle streams. The air buzzed with warmth, conversation, and the soft hum of insects drawn to the blossoms. For many, Beltane was also a time of divination. The season's liminality, Its position between spring and summer made it ideal for seeking guidance. Elders practiced quiet forms of scrying, gazing into water-filled bowls or observing the patterns made by fire's last embers. Young people watched the flight of birds or the way flower petals drifted across streams, believing these movements carried hints of the season's influence on their fortunes. Divination during Beltane was never meant to predict fate with certainty. It simply invited reflection, helping individuals align themselves with the flow of the coming months. Later in the day, communities often held friendly contests or games, foot races, stone throwing, climbing competitions, or feats of balance. These activities echoed the vitality of the season, expressing its energetic, spirited character. The laughter of participants carried across fields, mixing with the calls of birds and the rustle of high grasses. Even those who did not compete cheered joyfully, celebrating strength and lightheartedness as essential parts of Beltane's blessing. As the sun began its slow descent, the bloomed meadows glowed in shades of gold and soft orange. Shadows lengthened, stretching gently across the grass like the arms of resting spirits. The heat of midday faded into a warm, calm breeze. Many gathered once more near the remains of the bonfire, drawn to its gentle warmth and the memories it still carried. The ashes, soft and grey, seemed to hold the shape of the flames that had danced in the night. Evening rituals were quieter than those of the night before. Families walked through fields, brushing their hands over new growth and murmuring words of gratitude. Lovers wandered beneath blossoming trees, leaving ribbons tied to branches as symbols of devotion. Shepherds checked on their herds, feeling the renewed strength of the animals in the fading light. All movements slowed as Beltane shifted toward its close, as though the day itself were settling into contentment. When dusk finally deepened, a second, smaller fire was sometimes lit, not for ceremony, but for conversation. People gathered in a ring around the gentle flames, sharing stories passed down through generations. These tales spoke of ancient Beltane nights when the boundaries between worlds shimmered, when forest spirits watched from behind the trees, and when blessings slipped into the world through cracks of moonlight. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining the unseen presences just beyond the fire's glow. The night drew on in soft waves. Warm lantern light, murmured voices, the scent of blossoms carried through the air. As the moon climbed, bright and serene, it cast a silver path across the fields, illuminating the remnants of flowers scattered from the maypole dance. The embers glowed faintly in the dark, holding the last breath of Beltane's fire. By the time the village slept, the world felt transformed, not through spectacle, but through warmth, through laughter, through the gentle courage of beginning a new season, through the soft glow that lingered in every hearth and heart. For Beltane was the moment when the world stepped fully into its own brightness, a season born from fire, guided by light, and carried forward by the quiet, enduring joy of summer's first dawn. Long before the full weight of harvest filled the fields, long before autumn's chill brushed the edges of the leaves, there came a moment in the Celtic year when the land offered its very first gifts of abundance. It was not yet the heavy harvest, those great weeks when grain bent low beneath its own fullness, but the early whisper of plenty, the first sign that the year's labor would bear fruit. This turning was honored as Lughnasadh, a festival shaped by gratitude, craftsmanship, and the deep, ancient bond between land and people. It marked the beginning of the harvest season, when the world stood poised between the fullness of summer and the slow descent toward autumn's calm. Unlike Beltane's firelit exuberance or Samhain's shadowed quiet, Lughnasadh held a softer energy, an energy of appreciation, of community, of early blessing. The Celts saw this moment not as the end of summer, but as its golden height. Fields shimmered beneath long daylight, grain heads swayed gently in warm breezes, and rivers moved with the sleepy confidence of midsummer. Yet alongside this warmth came a sense of responsibility, For the first fruits were more than food. They were signs that the year's cycle was turning once again. The land had given its early bounty, and the people responded with celebration and reverence. At the heart of Lughnasadh stood Lugh, the bright god of skill, mastery, and craftsmanship. Lugh was not a deity of a single art, he was the god of many. Warrior, smith, poet, harper, historian, healer, his talents spanned countless domains. The festival bearing his name honored not only the fruits of the land, but the fruits of human hands. For the Celts believed that the first harvest reflected both nature's generosity and the skill of those who shaped the year with labor, patience, and knowledge. To honor Lugh was to honor every craft, every skill, every quiet act of creation that sustained the community. The days before the festival were spent in steady preparation. Families walked through fields to examine the grain, brushing their hands gently over the ripening stalks. They gathered early berries and the first apples, arranged baskets of soft bread, and brewed ales flavored with herbs gathered during the height of summer. In the air lingered the scent of warm earth, the faint sweetness of early fruit, and the slow hum of insects drifting lazily through long grass. Everything felt touched by sunlight, as though the season itself wished to linger in this golden moment. As dawn rose on the first morning of Lughnasadh, people gathered at high places, hilltops, grassy ridges, ancient earthworks where their ancestors had stood for centuries. These elevated spaces offered views of valleys filled with life, fields stretching like patchwork quilts, forests glowing in green fullness, rivers tracing silver lines through the land. Standing at these heights, communities offered prayers of gratitude to the spirits of the land, thanking them for the warmth, the rains, the growth. The rising sun cast long beams of amber light across the fields, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended in a stillness too vast for words. Among the most cherished rituals was the cutting of the first sheaf, a symbolic gathering of the earliest grain, performed with reverence and care. No scythe struck this sheaf with thoughtless speed. Instead, it was cut by hand, bound with ribbon or braided grass, and carried home like a sacred gift. Sometimes it was placed on an altar for the rest of the season, representing the spirit of the grain. In other places, it was woven into a small figure, a harvest doll, believed to hold the blessing of the field. This figure remained in the home until the next harvest, a guardian of prosperity and protection. After the first sheaf was honored, games and contests began, competitions inspired by Lugh's legendary mastery. Races stretched across fields still warm from the morning sun. Stone-throwing contests tested strength. Jumping competitions filled the air with lively cheers. Even the simplest contest was seen as a tribute to skill and vitality, reflections of the god whose name the festival bore. Young people challenged each other with playful confidence, while elders watched with gentle pride, remembering contests from their own youth. Craftspeople played a central role in these gatherings. Smiths displayed tools wrought with precision. Weavers presented cloth dyed with summer herbs. Carvers set out wooden figures, spoons, bowls, each polished with quiet devotion. Poets recited verses that captured the brightness of the season, the fullness of fields, the sweetness of first fruits, the golden breath of the wind moving through tall grain. Their words drifted across the crowd like threads of sunlight, binding listeners to the land's rhythm. For Lughnasadh was a festival of creation in all forms: food, art, games, and story. Feasting followed the contests, and though the harvest had only begun, tables filled with early treats: fresh berries, bread baked from the previous year's grain, tender vegetables pulled from the earth that very morning. Milk, butter, honey, and cheese-shaped meals rich with summer's influence. Families spread blankets beneath shade trees, their voices carried by the warm afternoon wind. Children ran barefoot through the grass, carrying handfuls of blueberries or apples, staining their fingers with sweetness. The world felt abundant, generous, balanced. One of the most meaningful Lughnasadh customs was the pilgrimage to high places, a tradition reaching deep into the ancient world. These walks were not mere hikes, they were acts of spiritual alignment. Climbing a hill or mountain symbolized climbing toward insight, toward clarity, toward the blessing that rested in the height of summer's light. Some journeys took entire days, with families stopping along the way to gather herbs or leave offerings at natural springs. Once atop the peak, people shared small meals, reflected on the passing year, and offered thanks for the strength to continue. Wells, too, held special importance. Pilgrims decorated sacred wells with flowers, ribbons, and small tokens, asking for blessings of health and protection. Water drawn on Lughnasadh was believed to carry healing power, warmed by the sun and touched by the blessings of the season. People dipped cloths into the wells, tied them to nearby trees, and watched them flutter in the breeze like colorful prayers woven through branches. In meadows and near riverbanks, musicians played slow, winding melodies, their notes blending with the rustle of grain and the chirp of distant insects. Dancers moved in gentle patterns, circular steps, spiraling turns, mirroring the wheel of the year as it tilted toward its slower half. Even the shadows at this time of year felt warm, soft-edged content. The land seemed to breathe in a quieter rhythm, heavy with sunlight yet already carrying a faint, distant whisper of the coming autumn. In the late afternoon, when the heat mellowed into a golden hush, communities gathered for storytelling. Elders recounted tales of Lugh's feats, the contests he won against the gods, the wisdom he gained through skill, the way he honored his foster mother by creating the festival that bore his name. These stories did not boast of conquest or battle. They spoke of mastery, dedication, and the way one life enriched the lives of many. Children listened with shining eyes, imagining Lugh moving through fields of tall grain, his presence stirring the world into brilliant motion. As evening came, fires were lit, not the towering flames of Beltane, but gentler fires that warmed the gathering and cast long, comforting shadows across the fields. People sat close together, sharing the last of the day's bread and sweet fruit. The scent of smoke drifted upward, blending with the earthy smell of ripening crops. The sky deepened into rose, then violet, then the dark blue of late summer twilight. Stars appeared one by one, glimmering softly as if reflecting the golden fields below. By nightfall, the world felt wrapped in warmth. The air, rich with summer's breath, held a stillness that felt both peaceful and full of promise. Crickets sang softly in the distance. Owls called from forest edges. And the first fruits of the season rested in baskets beside the fire, glowing in the dim light like small, earthly stars. For Lughnasadh was the moment the land whispered its first promise of harvest, a gentle offering, a golden beginning, a blessing shaped by sunlight, skill, and gratitude at the turning center of the year. As the first night of Lughnasadh faded into soft morning light, the festival did not end. It simply shifted into a quieter, deeper rhythm. Dawn rose slowly across the fields, brushing everything with a pale gold that made the world look softened, almost dreamlike. Mist lingered over meadows heavy with grain. Dew rhinestoned every blade of grass. And the land, warmed by the tender breath of early sunlight, felt like it was stretching awake after a long, contented sleep. The early hours of Lughnasadh were filled with a kind of hushed gratitude. Though the celebrations of the previous day had been lively, games, feasts, music, and laughter, this second day held a more reflective tone. It was a time when the people acknowledged the deeper meaning of the season, that the year had reached its height and the long arc of warmth was beginning its slow, graceful descent toward autumn. Summer's energy was still strong, but already a subtle change moved beneath the surface. The land, though abundant, felt slightly heavier, as though preparing for the work of gathering what it had grown. Families rose early to tend their fields. They walked slowly through tall grain, letting the ripening heads brush against their palms. The scent of sun-warmed wheat and barley created a gentle sweetness in the air, familiar and comforting. Birds flitted overhead, chirping with late summer confidence. Even the breeze seemed to hum with the breath of harvest. Many paused to bow their heads in thanks, not to any single deity, but to the earth itself, to the cycle that carried them, to the quiet forces that kept life in balance. The first fruits, gathered the day before, were prepared with care. Some were used in simple meals shared between neighbors. Warm breads made with early grain, berries simmered into sweet sauces, apples sliced thin and served with honey. Others were placed on altars inside homes, their colors bright against wooden surfaces. Deep red berries, golden oats, pale green apples, sprigs of fragrant herbs. These early offerings symbolized not only gratitude, but trust. Trust that the full harvest would come. Trust that the wheel of the year continued its turning. Across the village, craftspeople continued their contributions to the festival. Lughnasadh was as much a celebration of skill as of harvest, and the second day allowed more time for people to share their creations. Blacksmiths displayed polished tools whose surfaces glinted in the sun. Carvers set out intricate wooden boxes, spoons, and figurines. Weavers unfurled lengths of cloth dyed in summer's palette. Soft greens, warm yellows, deep blues like twilight over a field. Each piece felt like a fragment of the season made tangible. Poets, too, played an important role. On the second day of Lughnasadh, they often recited verses dedicated to Lugh, honoring his mastery across all crafts. Their words drifted through open spaces, gentle, melodic, filled with imagery of golden fields, ripening fruit, warm winds, and the quiet pride of a community watching the land answer their months of care. A single poem could stir memories across generations, linking present celebration with the ancient roots of the festival. Children continued to run through the meadows, but even their play carried a special tone on this day. They collected fallen petals, chased dragonflies hovering above the grasses, and braided small wreaths of wildflowers. Many joined in gentle games, rolling hoops, leaping over woven cords, balancing on low wooden beams. Their laughter echoed like bright bells across the fields, weaving through the rhythm of the day. To watch children during Lughnasadh was to witness life at its purest, sunlit, unburdened, free. One of the most meaningful traditions of the festival was the trial of the first loaf. Using flour ground from the earliest cut grain, families baked a simple loaf of bread. When it was finished, they did not eat it immediately. Instead, they held it in both hands, offering thanks for the harvest that would soon follow. Only after this moment of gratitude did they break the bread, sharing it among all present. This act symbolized the relationship between people and land, a sacred partnership built on trust, labor, and mutual nourishment. Nearby, healers and herbalists laid out bundles of herbs gathered during the height of summer. Their tables overflowed with mugwort, yarrow, meadowsweet, thyme, and chamomile, plants believed to carry strong healing power when picked near Lughnasadh. People approached with respect, asking for remedies or blessings for the months ahead. The herbalists worked with calm precision, wrapping herbs in linen, explaining how to steep or burn them gently, whispering small prayers under their breath. These quiet exchanges felt almost like spells woven into the air, soft, protective, timeless. As the sun climbed higher, communities prepared for one of Lughnasadh's most cherished traditions, the gathering of wild berries. Families walked into the woods or along hedgerows, baskets swinging from their hands. Brambles heavy with fruit glistened in the light. Blackberries, still firm but sweetening with the season, stained fingers purple. Children delighted in finding the largest berries, holding them up triumphantly before dropping them into the baskets. Every berry harvested felt like a gift from the land, a small promise of the abundance still to come. Some of the gathered berries were eaten immediately, juices running down chins in purple streaks. Others were taken home to be preserved, cooked into early jams, pressed into wines, or dried for winter use. But a small handful was always set aside and returned to the earth as an offering. Placed gently on river stones, buried beneath apple trees, or left at the roots of hawthorn bushes, these berries symbolized the community giving back, acknowledging the land not as something to take from endlessly, but as a living partner deserving of reciprocity. In the warm glow of late afternoon, the festival moved into its contemplative phase. People gathered beneath shade trees, speaking softly about the changing season. The year had turned a corner. Even in the height of summer, the first shadow of autumn stretched across the horizon. It was not a sorrowful thought, only a recognition of time's gentle movement. The Celts understood that the wheel never froze, never rushed. It simply turned, season after season, carrying them forward. At this time of day, many took part in handfasting ceremonies, bonding unions not just through affection, but through seasonal blessing. Couples stood beneath arches of woven branches, their hands tied together with braided cords. Elders spoke words of blessing, invoking the spirit of Lugh and the strength of the harvest. The cords were tied loosely, symbolizing not binding but connection, two lives woven together like threads of a single cloth. These ceremonies often echoed through the valley with soft laughter, quiet vows, and the rustle of wind moving through trees. As evening approached, a gentle stillness settled across the land. Fires were lit once more, though smaller than the great Beltane blazes. Fires meant not for passage or protection, but for gathering warmth and sharing stories. Families and neighbors sat around the flames, the golden light flickering across their faces, blending with the deepening colors of twilight. Children leaned against their parents, growing sleepy as the warmth lulled them into calm. Elders told tales of Lugh, how he arrived at Tara and proved his mastery, how he honored his foster mother with games held in her memory, how he brought prosperity to the land through dedication to craft. But the stories were not only about gods, they were about people. They reminded listeners that skill mattered, that devotion mattered, that the harvest was not only the earth's gift, but the result of countless human hands working in harmony with the land's rhythm. When darkness deepened, stars emerged, soft, steady like points of blessing scattered across the sky. The moon rose quietly, casting a pale glow across fields of ripening grain. The air cooled but remained gentle, carrying the scent of herbs and fruit mingled with the faint smoke of dying fires. By the time the village drifted into sleep, the second day of Lughnasadh had woven its quiet magic through every home and heart. It had offered not extravagance, but grounding, an affirmation that the world was abundant, that the cycle of life continued, and that gratitude was a light capable of softening even the longest shadows. For Lughnasadh was the season when the year exhaled in warmth, a moment of golden balance, a whisper of autumn wrapped in summer's glow, and the gentle promise that every seed sown in patience would one day return in kindness. Long before winter wrapped the land in frost, long before the first true snow fell across quiet hillsides, there came a moment in the Celtic year when the world seemed to hold its breath between seasons. The warmth of summer had faded, the fields lay bare after harvest, and the light dimmed earlier each evening. This turning, soft, solemn, mysterious, was known as Samhain, the festival that marked the passage into the dark half of the year. Unlike the brightness of Beltane or the golden fullness of Lughnasadh, Samhain carried a stillness shaped by memory, reflection, and the thin veil between the seen and unseen. The Celts believed the year began in darkness. Samhain was not an ending, it was a beginning. It was the moment the wheel turned inward, inviting people to rest, to remember, and to gather warmth against the months of quiet ahead. The world outside grew colder, shadows stretched long across fields, and the landscape softened into muted tones of brown, grey, and pale gold. Animals moved slower, the last leaves drifted softly from branches, and the air carried a scent of earth settling into sleep. Yet beneath this stillness, something sacred stirred, an ancient sense that the world was preparing to dream. Samhain was both gentle and profound. It was a time when families drew close, when hearth fires burned longer and conversations grew quieter. It was a time to honor ancestors, to acknowledge the passage of time, and to express gratitude for all that had been gathered from the land. It was also a time of reverence for the unseen, spirits, memories, forces that moved beneath the surface of ordinary life. The Celts felt that during Samhain, the boundary between this world and the other world thinned, allowing the two realms to touch in ways that were impossible during the bright months. Preparations for the festival began early. Families stored their final harvests, arranging root vegetables, grains, apples, and herbs in cool cellars or wooden bins. Livestock were moved into winter shelters, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Tools were cleaned and stored, fields were cleared of their remnants, and the land was left to rest. Every action carried a quiet sense of closure, as though the earth itself were tucking in beneath a blanket of cooling air. At home, hearths became the center of life. People swept their floors, arranged fresh bedding, and laid out simple decorations made from dried corn, late flowers, and woven straw. In the soft glow of firelight, these objects cast long, comforting shadows across wooden walls. Families gathered to share early winter meals, hearty foods that carried the memory of summer's brightness. The warmth of the hearth became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even as darkness grew, warmth could still be created with intention, care, and community. On the eve of Samhain, when the last light of the sun faded into deep twilight, families lit their hearth fires with special reverence. The flame was tended carefully, fed with small pieces of wood blessed earlier in the year. This fire represented continuity, light carried forward into the darkest season. In some traditions, homes extinguished their hearths earlier in the evening, letting the fire die completely before relighting it from a communal flame kindled at a central bonfire. This act symbolized unity, the connection between all members of the tribe, and the power of shared light in times of darkness. Outside, under the first true night of Samhain, bonfires burned on hillsides, large, protective fires that glowed across the landscape like guardian stars. These fires were believed to purify, to illuminate, and to guide both spirits and the living. The light from the flames flickered across the fields, casting moving shadows that made the world feel alive with presence. Families approached the bonfire with offerings, small bundles of herbs, pieces of bread, dried berries, or tokens representing gratitude for the year's blessings. They tossed these into the flames, watching sparks rise into the darkness like tiny souls ascending. Around the bonfire, a hush often settled, a reverent silence broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the quiet murmur of wind. People stood with heads slightly bowed, listening to the fire's voice, feeling its warmth wrap around them like a blessing. Children clutched their mother's hands, sensing the sacredness of the moment, even if they did not understand it fully. The festival did not frighten them. Rather, it filled them with awe. Samhain was a night when the world felt wide and mysterious, yet held gently in the cradle of community. One of the most cherished traditions of Samhain was the honoring of ancestors. Families set places for departed loved ones at their tables, laying out bread, apples, or a cup of milk in their memory. These offerings were not given with sorrow, but with love. The dead were not gone. They were simply walking in another realm, and on Samhain, the distance between realms thinned enough for their presence to be felt. People spoke their names softly, shared stories of their lives, and expressed gratitude for the ways those ancestors had shaped the present generation. In many homes, candles were placed in windows to guide wandering spirits back to familiar places. These small flames flickered in the night, casting warm halos of light across the cold air. Sometimes carved turnips or gourds were set outside with small embers placed inside, their soft glow acting as beacons and protectors. These lights, humble yet meaningful, mirrored the bonfire on the hill, a constellation of human-made stars meant to pierce the deepening dark. Samhain was also a time of divination, a tradition rooted in the belief that during this season of thin veils, insight was easier to receive. Women gazed into bowls of water, watching how candlelight reflected on the surface and reading patterns in the soft ripples. Men observed the way embers shifted in the hearth, how sparks jumped or settled, interpreting these subtle movements as signs for the months ahead. Young people dropped hazelnuts into the fire to see how they popped or cracked, believing these reactions revealed hints about futures or relationships. These acts of divination were quiet, intimate, and approached with sincere curiosity. They were not attempts to control fate, but to understand the flow of life in a deeper way. People sought guidance on matters of family, harvest, health, and community. And though the answers were often symbolic or open to interpretation, they provided comfort, an affirmation that the world still spoke, even through silence and shadow. As the night grew darker and colder, the landscape took on an otherworldly quality. Fog began to gather in low valleys, drifting slowly like a soft, white river. Trees stood as dark silhouettes against a deepening sky. The air felt thick with possibility, charged with the presence of something ancient and unseen. People walking home from the bonfire did so with deliberate steps, carrying lanterns whose light formed small glowing circles in the night. They spoke little, allowing the quiet of the land to settle inside them. Inside their homes, families closed doors against the cold and drew closer to the hearth. The fire crackled steadily, sending warmth into the dim corners of the room. Shadows danced along the walls, rising and falling like silent storytellers. Children fell asleep with their heads in parents' laps, soothed by the sound of logs shifting in the fire. Adults sat in thoughtful silence, remembering loved ones, reviewing the year that had passed, feeling the weight of time in both its tenderness and its swiftness. In that gentle quiet, Samhain revealed its true nature. It was not a festival of fear, but of transition, not a night of endings, but of beginnings. It was the moment the year turned inward, inviting every soul to reflect, to rest, to gather strength for the long winter ahead. It was the season when stories were told softly, when memories were kept alive through whispered names, when the community's bond deepened in the shared glow of firelight. For Samhain carried within it a truth the Celts understood deeply. That darkness is not absence, but presence, a space for remembering, a cradle for new beginnings, a soft and sacred threshold through which the year must pass to return to light once more. As the deep night of Samhain stretched toward dawn, the world seemed wrapped in a quiet unlike any other time of year. The bonfires on the hillsides had burned down to glowing embers, their last sparks winking softly into the air like fading stars. A thin mist rolled through the valleys, settling around the stones, the hedgerows, the empty fields that only weeks before had skirted with golden grain. Everything lay in a hush so complete that even the wind moved more gently, as if mindful of the spirits returning to their realms. Inside the homes scattered through the countryside, hearth fires glowed with steady warmth. Families gathered close, wrapped in woven blankets, their faces illuminated by soft orange light. The hearth was the heart of Samhain, the one unwavering glow as the year stepped fully into its darker half. People whispered stories of their ancestors, speaking the names of grandparents, great-grandparents, and those further back still. People never met in life, but felt as part of the ancient thread tying past to present. Each name spoken aloud was like a small candle rekindled in memory. As dawn approached, many kept a practice known as the silent hour, a time just before sunrise when no words were spoken. In this hour, the world felt especially thin, suspended between night and day, between the weight of the past and the hope of the coming months. People sat quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint sounds of animals shifting in their stalls outside. It was believed that during this quiet window, one could feel the presence of ancestors most strongly, like a soft warmth settling over the shoulders, or a familiar calm rising in the chest. When the first hint of pale light touched the horizon, families stepped outside to greet the new year. The air carried the sharpness of coming winter, cool enough to sting the breath, but still gentle in its early hour. Dew clung to the grass, forming small beads of silver on each blade. The land looked muted, softened, yet not asleep, merely turning inward. Standing beneath this near-winter sky, people offered simple blessings for the year to come. These blessings were not grand or elaborate. They were quiet hopes whispered into the cold air, for health, for peace, for strength, for the community's well-being. Later in the morning, after the silent hour had passed, communities gathered once more by the remains of the bonfire. Though the flames had died, the ashes still carried a sense of the night's power. People walked slowly around the ashes, some touching them lightly with their fingertips, others gathering small amounts to bring home. Ash from the Samhain fire was believed to hold protective strength, capable of guarding a home through winter storms and long nights. Sprinkled over doorways or placed in small sacks hung beside the hearth, it served as a reminder of the communal flame that had united everyone the night before. As the sun rose higher, families prepared meals that honored both the living and the dead. Tables filled with hearty dishes, stews thick with root vegetables, bread baked from the last of the harvest, apples stewed with spices, and soft cheeses aged through summer. At one end of the table, a place was set for the ancestors, their portion of food left untouched as an offering. These meals were eaten slowly, not in feasting celebration, but in quiet gratitude. The flavors of the season, earthy, warm, grounding, seemed to echo the mood of the day. Children played softly near the hearth, their voices lowered out of respect for the day's solemnity. They shaped small dolls out of straw or cloth, representations of the old year's spirit. Some placed these dolls in baskets to be buried later in the fields, symbolizing the return of energy to the earth for rest and renewal. Others carried them to the edge of streams, letting the flowing water carry the last remnants of summer's energy downstream. Each gesture was a small ritual, a way of acknowledging the cycles turning in the countryside. Healers and seers prepared for the day's divination rites. Though the night had been the most powerful time for these practices, the days surrounding Samhain still held the veil thin. People visited these wise folk with hopes of understanding the coming winter, whether it would be harsh or mild, whether the harvest stores would last, whether illnesses might come, whether the community would remain strong. The seers used simple tools, bowls of water, smoldering embers, the patterns of fallen leaves, or the movement of smoke rising from herbs burned in clay pots. They interpreted signs with care, offering not predictions but guidance shaped by intuition and centuries-old wisdom. As the afternoon light softened into a muted grey, families ventured to burial mounds, old stone circles, or sacred groves. These places, steeped in the memory of countless generations, held potent significance during Samhain. People brought offerings of flowers, nuts, bread, or small carvings left near stones worn smooth by time. They knelt or sat quietly, letting the silence of the place settle around them. Some spoke softly to their ancestors. Others closed their eyes and simply listened, trusting that presence could be felt without words. The land itself seemed to pulse with an ancient stillness, a calm that resonated deep in the bones. By late afternoon, a gentle melancholy settled over the community. Not sadness, but a reflective softness, the awareness that another bright season had passed and the darker months were arriving. Yet within that melancholy lay a kind of peace. The Celts did not fear darkness, they understood it as a vital part of the cycle. Darkness allowed rest, reflection, and renewal. It was a time to gather inward, to nurture seeds hidden from light, to honor the past and prepare for the future. Samhain was the doorway through which this deep, reflective season began. As evening approached once again, smaller fires were lit near homes. These were not the high bonfires of the previous night, but modest flames meant for comfort and protection. Families gathered around them, speaking softly about the year that had ended. They recounted moments of joy, challenges overcome, loved ones lost, and blessings gained. These conversations were not hurried, they unfolded slowly, like embers glowing through the last moments of day. Children listened to these stories with bright, curious eyes, learning the rhythms of their history through the voices of those who lived it. Musicians sometimes played at dusk, their melodies soft and haunting. Flute, harp, or a single drum whose slow rhythm echoed the heartbeat of the season. These songs drifted through the village like gentle ghosts, carrying with them memories and a sense of continuity. The music was not meant to entertain but to soothe, to honor the softness of the night, to invite reflection on the turning of the wheel. As darkness settled completely, families returned indoors. Candles were placed at windows, their light flickering gently in the cold air. These candles symbolized guidance, the hope that any wandering spirits might find their way without fear. They also served as a message to the living, that even in the deepest night, light could be found. The golden glow of these small flames cast dancing patterns across wooden walls, filling rooms with an atmosphere both peaceful and reverent. Before going to sleep, many families performed one final ritual. They opened a window or door slightly, just enough for a breath of cold air to slip through, inviting any lingering ancestors to depart peacefully. The gesture was simple, tender, and symbolic, a sign of hospitality, a recognition that Samhain's threshold was closing, and a gentle farewell until the veil thinned again in the next turning of the year. When the village finally fell silent, only the sound of wind moving through bare branches remained. The world outside lay dark, still, and strangely comforting. In this deep quiet, the essence of Samhain lingered, a presence that felt both ancient and immediate, heavy with memory yet light with possibility. For in the Celtic understanding, darkness was the womb of beginnings, the place where new dreams stirred unseen. Samhain was the pause between heartbeats, the quiet breath before the year began again. It was the moment when memory and mystery intertwined, when the veil lifted just enough for love to be felt across realms, and when every soul, living and gone, stood together in the gentle doorway of the turning year. Long before ink touched parchment or stone carried carved memory, there was a shape the ancient Celts trusted above all others. It appeared in the sky and in the seasons, in the turning of day into night, and in the quiet cycle of life into death and back into life again. This shape, simple, unbroken, endlessly returning, was the circle. To the Celts, the circle was not merely geometry. It was the breath of existence, the rhythm of the world, the sacred map upon which all life moved. And in the wheel of the year, this circle found its clearest form, a living guide through light, darkness, growth, rest, and the gentle balance that held everything together. Where other cultures measured time in lines, moving forward, never turning back, the Celts saw time as something round, something that moved in endless spirals. They watched the sun rise and set in arcs across the horizon, tracing a path that shifted through the seasons. They observed the moon's waxing and waning, its shape growing full then fading, only to return once more in silver brilliance. They felt the turning of seasons deep in the land and in their own bodies, understanding that no moment truly ended, but simply curved into the next. In this understanding, the circle became a sacred truth, not a symbol invented, but a symbol discovered. The wheel of the year embodied this understanding with perfect clarity. It showed that life unfolded not in straight paths, but in gentle rotations, each season giving way to the next without haste or force. The Celts saw this pattern everywhere, in the growth of crops, in the migrations of animals, in the rhythms of birth and death. To them, The circle was a reflection of the universe's natural order, an echo of the cosmic cycles that moved beyond human sight. Even the stones of ancient monuments were arranged in circles, their placement mirroring patterns seen in the heavens. In the first days of their year, darkness held the world gently, offering stillness rather than fear. Samhain marked this beginning, reminding the people that life often starts in quiet shadows. From that darkness, the first spark of light emerged at Imbolc, a faint but steady flame carried by Brigid's blessing. Beltane brought the circle into its radiant arc of warmth and life, while Lughnasadh marked the turning toward abundance and gratitude. Finally, the soft descent into the darker season began again, each point along the circle equally sacred. This was the shape of existence. A turning, a returning, a continuity that never broke. Circles appeared in daily life as well. In the way families gathered around the hearth at night, forming a ring of warmth and conversation. In the way children played in circular dances on spring mornings. In the way warriors stood shoulder to shoulder in a protective circle around their kin. Even in the weaving of seasonal wreaths or the shaping of Brigid's crosses, the curve of the circle carried meaning, connection, unity, protection, and flow. A circle had no beginning or end, and so it symbolized eternity, the ever-present link between past and future. In spiritual practice, circles carried even deeper significance. Druids held many of their rites within ring forts or stone circles, places where the boundaries between worlds were believed to thin. These circles were not built by chance. They were aligned with celestial movements, sunlight entering certain stones only on specific days of the year. The interplay of light and shadow within these sacred rings was considered a dialogue between earth and sky. Standing within such a circle, one could feel the ancient pulse of the land, the connection between the human spirit and the great cycles that governed existence. The circle also shaped the way the Celts viewed community. They understood that every life was connected, each person a thread in a woven pattern that curved endlessly. Decisions were made in gatherings where people stood or sat in circles, allowing every voice to be seen and heard. Leadership flowed from this shared understanding. That wisdom came not from hierarchy alone, but from the collective turning of shared experience. Even storytelling often took place with listeners gathered in circular formation, their faces illuminated by firelight as tales moved from one generation to the next in an unbroken chain. In the natural world, the Celts saw circles everywhere. They saw it in the rings that spread out from stones dropped into rivers, the rippling effect echoing how actions carried consequences beyond their moment. They saw it in the rings of mushrooms that grew after summer rains, called fairy rings, believed to mark places touched by the otherworld. They saw it in the spiral patterns carved into ancient stones, symbols that hinted at deeper mysteries. The possibility that existence was not only circular, but multi-layered, spiraling deeper into meaning with each turn. Even the act of walking through the seasons felt circular to them. Each festival carried echoes of the one before it, and hints of the one that followed. Samhain's darkness contained the seed of Imbolc's early light. Beltane's fire carried within it the warmth that would ripen into Lughnasadh's abundance. Lughnasadh itself foreshadowed the slowing that would culminate in Samhain's inward turning. Everything moved with intention, rhythm, and grace. The circle was the underlying pulse of life, steady and eternal. In the homes of the Celts, circles shaped rituals of protection. Families placed circular stones near thresholds, believing these simple shapes could guard against ill fortune. Bowls of water, placed in round wooden basins, were used for scrying and cleansing. Babies were blessed by being carried in gentle circles around the hearth, symbolizing welcome and continuity. Even the stirring of certain herbal mixtures followed circular motions, reinforcing the belief that the shape itself held power. Art and craftsmanship reflected this reverence. Jewelry often displayed spirals, triple spirals, and intricate knotwork that wound endlessly without beginning or end. These designs were not merely decorative. They symbolized the eternal flow of energy, the cycles of life and death, the interconnectedness of all beings. A spiral could represent growth, expansion outward from the center, or introspection, moving inward toward the core of the self. A knot could symbolize the unbreakable bonds between family, tribe, land, and spirit. Every line that curved back upon itself carried meaning. To sit beside a fire on a quiet night was to witness the circle in motion. Flames rose, curled, and fell in continuous patterns. Sparks drifted upward in small arcs that dissolved into darkness. The shape of the hearth itself, round or gently curved, mirrored the shape of the sun, the moon, and the wheel of time. People often lost themselves in the rhythm of firelight, feeling their thoughts soften into the motion of the flame. It was in these moments, when the mind grew still and the heart aligned with the fire's glow, that the deeper truth of the circle could be felt most clearly. The circle also shaped the Celtic understanding of relationships between worlds. The living and the dead were not separated by a sharp divide. Their connection curved like a circle, meeting again during sacred festivals such as Samhain. In moments when the veil thinned, the two realms touched, not in fear but in recognition. Life curved into death, and death curved back into life. This understanding offered comfort, grounding the people in a worldview where loss was not absolute, but a turning of the wheel. Seasons changed, years shifted, generations rose and fell, but the circle endured. It held memory. It held promise. It held the quiet assurance that everything belonged, everything had its place, and everything would return in its time. Even in the hardest winters, when nights stretched long and cold, people trusted the circle to bring light again. Even in the brightest summers, they knew the circle would guide them gently toward rest. It was a rhythm of trust, trust in the land, trust in the unseen, trust in the turning that shaped every breath. By the time the sun set on a long day of work or celebration, the Celts understood that they were not separate from this circle. They were part of it, woven into its pattern like threads in a great tapestry. Their laughter, their struggles, their stories, all were carried forward in the turning, becoming part of something larger and more enduring than any single moment. To live within the wheel of the year was to live in harmony with the great circle that held the world. For the circle was not simply a symbol, it was the shape of time, the path of the seasons, the quiet truth whispered beneath every breath, that what ends will return, what fades will rise again, and what is lost will one day find its way home in the endless turning of the wheel. As the circle widened into the second half of its story, its presence in Celtic life became even more apparent, not only in the great rhythms of the seasons, but in the smallest gestures, the faintest motions of daily living. Everywhere, the curve of the circle could be found, in the shape of a ring of friends gathered beneath a tree, in the arc of a child's hand tracing a spiral in the dirt, in the way smoke rose from a hearth and curled like a whisper toward the beams overhead. To the Celts, these small circles carried the same quiet power as the great wheel of the year, each one a reminder that life moved in cycles too gentle to be fully seen, yet too deep to be ignored. In villages spread across hills and valleys, the circle became a symbol of continuity, binding generations together through shared stories and rituals. Elders often sat in round gatherings, retelling tales of long ago that seemed to spiral through time, each retelling slightly different, each remembering shaped by the teller's voice. These stories moved like rings on water, expanding outward from the center while still connected to the core of memory. Children would sit close, watching the firelight flicker across their elders' faces, feeling the circle of story close gently around them. In such moments, time seemed to soften, allowing the past to sit beside the present with no need for distance. The hearth, always central to Celtic life, reinforced this circular truth. Even when built in square or rectangular structures, the heart of the flame itself was a circle, its warmth radiating outward evenly, its glow spreading in gentle ripples. Families often arranged themselves around the fire in rings, each person taking comfort in the warmth shared among them. The hearth was not merely a source of heat, it was a spiritual center, a reminder that even in the coldest season, light could be kindled and maintained. The circle of people gathered there felt ancient, echoing countless nights across countless years when families had done the same. Circles shaped many rituals of protection and blessing. Before traveling, some would walk 3 full circles around their homes, offering prayers for safe passage. Mothers traced circles on their children's foreheads with ash or water, invoking guidance from ancestral spirits. Fathers carved round talismans from wood or stone to hang above doorways, believing that the shape itself repelled misfortune. These actions, though simple, reflected profound trust in the circle's quiet power. They were gentle gestures rooted in the belief that shape could shape fate. In the sacred sites scattered across the Celtic world, circles held even deeper meaning. Stone circles, arranged by hands long vanished into the mists of time, stood as silent witnesses to the turning of countless years. Each stone, weathered and steadfast, formed part of a greater whole. Standing in the center of such a circle felt like stepping into a pocket of ancient time. Wind moved differently there, brushing the skin with a cool, deliberate touch. Light passed through the stones in patterns that seemed purposeful, hinting at understandings older than memory. Visitors to these stone circles often spoke little. They walked slowly, tracing the shapes with their eyes and fingertips, feeling the rough surfaces against their skin. Some placed offerings, flowers, herbs, or small carved figures at the bases of the stones. Others simply stood still, letting the silence of the place settle into them. These circles were not monuments to what had been. They were living places where earth and sky conversed in rhythms too grand for language. To stand within them was to stand within the breath of the world. The spiral, a form closely related to the circle, deepened this understanding. Spirals carved into stone appeared in countless early Celtic sites, curling inward or expanding outward in endless flow. Some spirals were singular, others intertwined in patterns of 3 or more, forming symbols known today as the Triskel or Triskelion. These shapes represented life's continuous unfolding, the movement of time in cycles both large and small. For the Celts, the spiral was not merely decorative, it was a reflection of the energies that shaped existence, a visual reminder that one could journey inward just as easily as outward. The spiral also echoed the growth patterns found in nature. The curves of shells, the unfolding of fern fronds, the swirling path of wind through tall grass. These natural spirals reinforced the Celts' belief that the world spoke in symbols, and that learning to read those symbols was a way of understanding life's deeper rhythms. Every spiral carved in stone or woven into cloth became a meditation on movement, how beginnings flowed into endings, and how endings curved seamlessly back into beginnings. As the seasons continued their turn around the wheel, the circle revealed its quiet wisdom in daily life. During Imbolc, the first hint of returning light shimmered like a thin ring on the horizon, faint but resilient. During Beltane, the bonfires formed circles of flame on hilltops, their light gathering communities into warm rings of celebration. During Lughnasadh, the first sheaf was often braided into circular shapes, symbolizing the closing of one cycle of growth and the start of another. During Samhain, candles placed in windows created small halos of light, circles of guidance for wandering spirits. The circle was everywhere, gently marking the rhythm of each turning, but the circle's significance extended beyond the natural year. It shaped the Celts' understanding of life itself. Birth was seen as an entry into the circle, childhood as a growing dance within it, adulthood as the outward expansion of one's influence, and old age as a gentle inward return. Death was not an exit, but a folding back into the circle's quiet center. Ancestors were part of this eternal curve. Their presence felt not as absence, but as a soft echo that accompanied every season. To live within this worldview was to feel held always by the continuity of the circle. Even conflict was softened by this understanding. Disagreements were approached not as linear divisions, but as curved paths that could bend back toward balance. Elders often advised, walk the circle of the matter, meaning to move around a problem from many angles, understanding it fully before acting. This approach encouraged patience, empathy, and reflection, values that supported the harmony of the community. Through the circle, unity was maintained not by force, but by the recognition that all lives curved back toward each other. Art continued to reflect this reverence. In jewelry, round brooches held cloaks in place. In pottery, curved lines spiraled around vessels, echoing the flow of water and air. In weaving, patterns bent gracefully back upon themselves. Even in the construction of homes, curved walls and rounded corners were sometimes favored, mimicking the soft lines of the natural world. Everywhere one looked, the influence of the circle could be found. Gentle, unobtrusive, yet undeniably powerful, spiritual rites deepened this connection. In certain ceremonies, participants walked in circular paths around sacred fires or wells, chanting softly as they moved. These rituals symbolized alignment with the universal flow, a way of stepping into harmony with forces larger than themselves. The movement felt meditative, each step following the last in a rhythm that calmed the heart and cleared the mind. By walking in circles, individuals connected with the past, the present, and the future, acknowledging their place within the wider unfolding of time. In the quietest moments, alone at dusk, watching the first star appear, people often felt the circle's presence most deeply. There was something comforting in the knowledge that the star had risen yesterday would rise again tomorrow, and had been rising long before they were born. Its returning arc across the sky mirrored the arc of their own lives, and the lives of all who came before. Even in the darkest winter, that celestial circle persisted, undiminished, a whisper of continuity that steadied the soul. By the time the wheel of the year completed its full rotation, people could look back on the cycle and see how every moment connected with the next. The bright fires of Beltane were echoed in the soft glow of Samhain. The early light of Imbolc was mirrored in the late light of Lughnasadh. Each season held fragments of the others, each curve of the circle containing both memory and promise. This understanding fostered a sense of peace, an acceptance that life was not a series of isolated moments, but a flowing, continuous journey. Thus, the circle became more than symbol, more than shape. It became a teacher, a companion, a reminder that nothing stands alone and nothing truly ends. To live within the circle was to trust the turning, to honor the quiet rhythm beneath all things, and to walk gently through the world knowing that every step leads not away, but back into the eternal curve of the wheel. And when the final turn of the wheel grew quiet, the world seemed to exhale into a stillness older than memory itself. The bright flames of Beltane, the soft candles of Imbolc, the golden fields of Lughnasadh, and the shadowed hush of Samhain, all of them drifted together like distant echoes, blending into a single breath of time that held both warmth and coolness, both beginning and ending. The year did not close with a door shutting, but with a soft curve returning to its point of origin, like a circle drawn in light against the sky. Across the land, the remnants of the seasons lingered gently. In the fields, the last traces of summer's sweetness clung to the air. In the forests, autumn's quiet footsteps whispered beneath the branches. In the sky, winter's patience gathered softly around the growing moon. And through all these shifting tides, the ancient presence of the circle remained, steady, tender, and endlessly returning. The people who walked these lands understood that life did not rush from one moment to the next. It flowed, spiraled, and curved, always carrying the memory of where it had been. In the hearts of those who kept the old festivals, the circle became a companion in the quiet hours. It reminded them that darkness was not to be feared, for within its calm lay rest and renewal. It reminded them that light would always return, even when the path seemed dim. And it reminded them that nothing precious was ever lost, not truly, for every memory curved back toward the present, and every ending carried its own promise of a gentle beginning. So the wheel turned once more, soft as a whispered blessing. Lights faded into embers, fields drifted into sleep, and the world entered a peaceful hush, wrapped in its own quiet wisdom. For the year, like the soul, moves in circles, ever turning, ever returning, carrying us gently through the seasons toward rest, toward renewal, and toward the quiet promise that we will always find our way back to the light again. The year once turned not with pages, but with bonfires shining across the hills. Every flame was a promise kept, that darkness and light would always follow one another.